It's kind of I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that I haven't watched some of these, but I just never caught them back in the day. The first one I saw next up was Demolition Man. Freaking loved it. I mean, immediately loved it. I've always been a huge Sylvester Stallone fan. The Rocky movies were, I watched them. They were kind of fun growing up, whatever. Really like the Rambo stuff. But just anything, and I never even always thought of Stallone as just an action hero. I remember watching, was it Oscar? I think that was one of the movies he did, but he's done other kind of movies, or he's brought levity to these certain adventure films that he's done. And I just always liked Stallone. I thought I've always been a fan of his work and his movies, but I never caught Demolition Man for whatever reason. I don't know why. It was right on my alley with Rob Schneider in it, because that was my era of watching Saturday Night Live back in the day, with Schneider, Mike Myers, Dana Carvey, Kevin Nealon, all of those. So, but yeah, so I don't know why I never saw it. I just never did, but loved the movie. It's not really based on any one book or anything. Apparently there's a short story that is somewhat similar. I never looked into that. Of course, it's got references to other great science fiction. Sandra Bullock's character is named Huxley, for the Brave New World reference there. But it's a great concept, if it deals with things that good science fiction would deal with, criminals being sentenced to cryonically being frozen, and then having rehabilitation kind of programmed into their brain, and so Stallone's character, the Demolition Man himself, once he comes out of this cryonic freeze, realizing that he's almost seamstress, like he's been given the skill to sew and stuff, and that was hilarious. Wesley Snipes is an excellent villain. I mean, just a perfect villain. I was really pleasantly surprised to see Otho from Beetlejuice. He was in this movie too. I didn't know that. It was great to see him pop up there. I forget the actor's name, but he was great. So yeah, this movie was brilliant. So much fun. There's some holes in the story here and there. I had to look up at one point, it's an example of how scripts can get cut up at some point, and that's fine. You need to translate from page to screen, and sometimes more adaptation is needed, when the actual making of the film. That's understandable, but you can't leave out major story points. So like at one point, he comes out of the freeze and he wants to know what happened to his daughter. And he's saying, no, don't tell me. And the way the movie is cut now, it kind of leads you to think at one point that Sandra Bullock's character is his daughter, but it's not supposed to. The story wasn't trying to lead you to think that she was his daughter. It's just that they cut the other scenes where he was talking about his daughter, or they were talked about what she went on to be or whatever. So the movie's left with you thinking, was Sandra Bullock his daughter? And then there's like a love scene that shows up between the two of them, and you're like, no, that can't be, So just an example of how not everything needs to be cut, guys. You develop the film properly. But Demolition Man, great movie, very funny, but very the action was excellent. I like this 90s aesthetic of science fiction where there was still color in the movies. Once you got to the 2000s, everything just starts to look black. And I don't, maybe it started with people trying to emulate Sin City too much. And Sin City was brilliant, right? That's supposed to be that black and white aesthetic. That's supposed to be what it is. But you did see this sort of steady decline of cinematography into nothing but drab. And it didn't start out completely like that, because if you look at like Nolan's Dark Knight films, even with all the problems I have in it, they're darker movies, but there's still color where there needs to be color. They're still dark for my taste visually, but just cinematographically, whatever. But that's where it starts, and then you eventually get to the point where like the Snyder films are just nothing but washed out. Then you get to the point where the Matt Reeves Batman film, and it's like, can we turn up the contrast a little bit, because I'm having trouble even seeing what's going on on the screen right now. You didn't have that in the great 90s sci-fi movies. So I really like Demolition Man. Great film, great story, very fun. At the ending, it's a great scene. In the ending is like, you get a little dirty, you get a lot cleaned up, and somewhere meet in the middle, and maybe it's a little too tied up in a neat little bow there in the end, but you can see how the the story would progress and they would carry out, the society from that point on or whatever. But could have used more, would have been great. Maybe continue it in some comics or something like that. That'd have been fun to keep the story going.